So it's a pleasure to be here. I think we are in some one of the most interesting times probably in the last 30 40 years. And the reason I say that is because in the last about 15 to 18 years, what has happened in our country is phenomenal. And it's in a sense it's probably unique. It has created a foundation which will last for many decades, and what we have seen so far is a beginning of what is coming our way. So I think that's where we need to have our mind. Why do I say that? Let me just give you a highlight of what is the reason for me to believe in this. The first thing is, I think fundamentally we are the only country where there is a national infrastructure which has been created and is also furthering ahead in enabling a lot of what we call the fintech and the reach and the last mile and the mfi, all those things which were hence earlier not very easy to do are now becoming, relatively speaking, easy. It's not easy, but it is relatively speaking easy because of the technology development as well as the reach. So that's the second thing. uh, the fact of the matter is, it's not just the tech, it is also the readiness of the consumer, which was a big challenge in our country. And thanks to the events like direct benefit transfer, followed by some of the unplanned events like demonetization, which even forced a Golgappa seller on the street become willing to accept a payment through digital means. And then there are many others which are actually kind of part of this journey. For example, the mobile penetration is a key component of what we are now taking forward, which was not there, say, 10 years ago, or not there as much as it is today. And there is still, in a way, 300 million people in this country who still don't have that, the kind of level of access they need to have. So the point being made is there is a very interesting change which has occurred and is continuing to occur, and it'll remain there for at least next 20-25 years. And on these basis, you have to actually plan the future of your organization, because this is where the country is going. Now, what has it done? It has done three four basic things. I come from banking, so I'll give you one example. Well, nobody could afford to open a branch in a rural village in India. Today you don't need a branch. You can actually provide the entire banking spectrum without opening any physical center. And it's possible because everything is on mobile. So that's one example. The other thing is the awareness of the consumer also is increased. Earlier, they would not be comfortable dealing with you and money, in a non-physical sense. Today, it's a norm. I mean, there's nothing there. The other thing is the traceability. Many times in the historic times, the events traceability was a big hindrance. So we were not comfortable, how much, if somebody says I make this much money, half of the money was unaccounted. Now with the whole change, it's not there yet, but it's going in that direction where the formalization of economy is taking a shape in a very structured manner, and it's actually going to increase by the day. It is increasing quite a bit. So a lot of it will become input to our ability to make some credit decisions or other related decisions. Now, obviously, this is all going in this. The other thing which is happening as a offshoot of this is also the complexity which is increasing by the day when it comes to the risk and compliances. Because with this expansion of your reach and the kind of numerous technologies, integration points, enablement through the back end, front end, regulatory bodies and all that, all of them then becomes a point where the network becomes very expanded. And with very expanded network comes the expanded risk of not just cyber, but also the fraud, the compliances, and there are numerous regulations which come into play. So that's the broad picture of what I think is happening, and we'll talk about a little bit in specific terms. When you talk about the environment, you have to understand, and specifically around fintech, that the one very key essential area for you to figure out is where are you operating. Uh, Banks have a very defined set of rule book. There are set instruction sets, do's, don'ts, this, that, and all. Then there are tiering which has taken place in the banking sector. There are universal bank, scheduled commercial bank, then there is a small finance bank, there's a payment bank, then there's NBFC, then MFI, then you have HFC. But then below all this is where we sit, we call ourselves FinTech. Now, it's essential for you to know that on a standalone basis, you could be a technology company, but the fact is you are integrated with the financial infrastructure of all the other companies which are highly regulated in nature. So whether you like it or not, you are in many forms or senses a subcontracted vendor to those companies, or at least a partner if you're a reasonably good player, which you will become, all of you, as you go forward. But initially the view is, I want to take a risk with you, so I want to make sure that you're okay, right? That's how they kind of view, and this is coming from a banker, which I used to be earlier. And this is an important area because this is also an opportunity for a lot of people who are starting on this journey to understand that when you're deciding what you're going to do and what you going to be operating like, you need to be very clear as to how much of this, which is the risk and compliance angle, you need to be aware of and fully be ready to deal with. Because what happens if you're a pure play sourcing platform, there is one set of thinking which is required. If you're creating your own book and you're holding the lending in your own system, then you have to be classified as something different, which could be NBFC, whatever other formats. And as and when you switch, there are lots of checks and balances which need to be put together before you successfully can say that I'm okay with everything. Because a lot of time I've seen the journey is pretty much up and down, and with the journey path you need to constantly evaluate this idea, saying, is it worth doing this or is it worth further? Because I have actually seen, and I'm not propagating this is right or that is right. Both models are very good. There are platforms which are just sourcing platforms. There are platforms which are saying, no, I'm not sourcing because the money lies in the real book, because that's what accrues the interest every night, right? So that's where we need to be. So this is the broad picture. So that's the other thing. So if you ask me in terms of what I view as an opportunity and the challenge, first I will make a statement which might actually be a little bit complicated for some people. My personal view is India has done a lot of work, but it has done work in two spaces in particular. One is payments, where we see n number of companies we are looking at in terms of whether it's Bharat Pay, Google Pay, Paytm, even including NPCIA supported all the infrastructure and all that. And the second area where this has actually been done well is the consumer lending. There is a good amount of work which has happened, led by the fintechs, but in the consumer space. Now, that's the thing. The opportunity, in my view, actually is there in the same space, is still a long way to go. But there is a completely different space, two spaces. I'll give you examples, and I can give you a longer list than that. Is where probably the next phase of evolution should go. It is the wholesale space. And when I use the word wholesale, I'm referring to the corporate. And I think the first step in that direction was the small corporate, which is now being called as MSME. So that's a huge opportunity. And these are entities which are business entities. They could be proprietorship, they could be partnership, could be LLP, whatever that is. But the credit underwriting is slightly different from what you typically do on a personal lender basis. So that's one thing. Even in the higher level of corporate structure, there is a big opportunity. So a lot of consumer problems have been solved, but a lot of corporate problems are yet to be solved. I give you one simple example. We talk about a lot of money flow internally, billions, but we actually don't realize that a very large chunk of money flows internationally. And global trade is another very paper centric, long tailing, complicated process. Sending a money from India, and I'm just talking about sending money for a personal this thing, takes 3 days. I mean, now actually it takes 3 hours because of IDFC's new system. But point is, trade, when you talk about LCs, which is the B2B business, there's enormous amount of work which can be done. I know for a fact, we did some study for somebody, and we figured out that 40% of the people who are actually producing the goods in the MSME segment do not want to directly export because they don't trust the buyer on the other side. They don't know, and it's too small an order for them to go through a due diligence and do all this. So up to $25,000, they don't even want to do direct exports. So they give it to somebody who aggregates. If you were to do a product which allows you to actually do the trade in a very transparent and visible way, you could actually, this is a $40 billion market we are talking about every year, right? This is the one. So the point I'm making is there is this whole segment which is yet to be addressed in a big way, and of course consumer segment is still a very, very long journey there. I think we've done a lot of work. Now what is, in my view, the way forward? In my view, there are a few things which I think will continue to happen. I still see that the credit penetration at a country level is pathetically low. So you could probably multiply 50 times more than what you have today. It's a great beginning, but it's a beginning. So one has to almost believe in this idea that what you see as a big business is not even a big business. I mean, 10,000 crores from our standpoint is a big money. But if you look at the total pool, it is no money. It is not even a rounding error. So in that sense, there is a huge opportunity. The good news is gradually this is getting captured. The infrastructure which has been put together caters to the basic needs, but when it comes to the other segments which I spoke earlier, there is work which is now happening, led by India Spirit and Government of India and many of our friends. They are putting together these aggregation models. They are talking about flow-based lending, where historically India has underwritten credit on the basis of last 3-year tax return, and that's not a reflection of how the future is going to look. The unfortunate thing is the EMI is going to be paid in future, and the income happened in the past. So that mismatch will now get addressed by actually creating what is being labeled as a cash flow-based lending, which is a great thing. And if you go back to what I started with, one of the reasons why it is becoming possible is because there is a GST. If there was no GST, there was no flow-based lending. So while people think this is a problem, I think it's a huge opportunity which government has actually created by simplifying the infrastructure around the tax. And then it gives you the feasibility to look at my daily turnover, because everything is now digitally recorded, and almost figure out how much income I accrued in the last 7 days. And if you ask me, you can do invoice level profitability, because the GST's mismatch tells you how much money you're making. And yes, they're not going to give you data the way you would expect, but there are alternate paths being created where you'll get to assess this thing. The second area has been historically, in our understanding, the fraud prevention. It's been a nightmare. I mean, I have seen when the BCs were rolled out all across the country, there were humongous number of issues. Even the regulators didn't know what to ask for, right? I have seen RBI meetings where they were confused, saying, what should we do with these guys? But if you fast forward now, the entire infrastructure has been established, has settled well. The norms have been fine-tuned. The number of reporting structures have been clarified. There are MISs which go. As a result, it's a pretty solid network, which also needs to expand. It's still a very small. I mean, we can talk about 5 million merchants, a big number. To me, it's not. Because every shopkeeper is a merchant potential. So there are lots of those things. Now, the other thing which has played very well is aggregation. And I've seen this aggregation starting from the Zomato version to now going into almost everything and anything, cars and loans and insurance and all that. But I still believe there is much to do in the supply chain space. Of course, there are companies like Homely and all which actually are creating platforms where you can buy everything to construct a house end to end. Those things are there. So that's there. And the other thing which I'm going to tell you is that I think I hear from the informal sources that there is a potential layer coming up, which is going to be actually taking into account the industry or a sector specific requirement. So one discussion which is currently taking place, and the reason I am just sharing that with you informally, is that there is also new opportunities which will keep emerging. For example, there's somebody who's proposing this idea that we should have a farming layer. Basically, everything in terms of information available and required from the sector, whether it's the land records, whether it's the crop record, whether it's the lending, borrowing, purchasing, payments related to the farming sector. Now, if you know, we are a 40% farming economy still, which is a huge number. And to me, anybody who gets into, of course, there are companies which are already working with the drones and other things which are actually giving you the ability to monitor your crop very, very differently. And they are actually creating a larger output. But I'm saying that's just a small beginning. So there are lots of new things which will keep emerging. So to me, I think we are in a very, very good spot. All the youngsters, people like me have probably 10, 15 years left. But people like you, most of you on the screen, I'm sure you have a much longer roadmap. And you're going to live this, phenomenal phase of this country. And I believe that one of the principle I tell people is that nothing is defined. You have to go and participate in defining that. If you're looking for somebody to give you a rule book saying play by this and you'll be successful, it's not a method I suggest. It's a mindset which requires you to do engineering live while you're riding the bicycle, and it's going to have ups and downs, and you're going to have to be comfortable dealing with failure. And I can tell you, 20 years ago, I would not have said that you leave your core job and get into a startup. Today I tell everybody, in fact my own son, saying, boss, what everybody does is fine, but you do something different. No. So to me, I think it's a very, very exciting time. I don't want to take too much time. I'm looking at watch constantly. And my take is, this is where I stand. I think we are in a good spot. And in FACE, we are trying to actually create a platform which allows you to have a constant interaction and learning from others who have been there and doing phenomenally, reasonably well. And the idea is to actually create an opportunity where you can bring up all your issues and we take them together as an industry rep and make a concentrated effort to get them to either resolve or clarify or whatever the answer is, so that we're not, everybody individually is not fighting the battle. So we believe that FACE in the coming times will become a reasonably well recognized platform where we will represent the industry, the fintech in particular. And our intent is very simple. The consumer empowerment basically talks about the fact that we believe there are lots of negativities being floated because people are doing their own things. So one of the area of interest for us is to actually do some sort of a boundary conditioning of sorts, which says, you have to be doing this. The idea is, over a period of time, if somebody looks at a FACE membership, says, okay, this company is fine because they are part of FACE. So that's where we're going. Happy to have Akshay answer any questions. Akshay, I'm putting you on spot. He's the founding member of, both Early Salary and FACE. So I am happy to answer any questions for the next 3-4 minutes, and then I'll stop.
Since Avtar sir, you opened up for the questions, I have a question for you, if you don't mind. This is about the data housing in India, the government regulation, the RBI regulation, and the recent troubles that one of the service providers is into, which has repercussions for the banks and probably the consumers also. So your take on this?
Sir, I must remind you that the first step taken by Government of India, or DOT, in those days was not now, it was in 2008, when they realized that all the IPs were terminating outside the country and they had no way of knowing what's happening where. And mind you, it's not just the private company, even Government of India own IPs were all terminating overseas. So if the secretary was writing to secretary, it was going to Europe. It was that bad. And many of the big guys still use hotmail.com, by the way, today. So what you hear in the data security, it's a very simple ask. And this is not a unique ask for India. Malaysia, for example, has had a rule that the data center has to physically be located in that country. And that rule has existed for 30 years. When there were no connectivity disciplines also, there was a hardwire running from one point to the other. There was no cloud, and all those terminologies were not born. I'm talking about that. So coming back to your question, I think this is fundamentally saying traceability has to be complete. if the data is not stored here, you don't have almost the right. So they are saying jurisdiction wise, you have to be within the jurisdiction which is controlled by us. And what is controlled by government of India? It's the boundary of this country. So all they're saying is that they are saying that data belongs to, because, and then there's a separate discussion which is happening in a country like Australia, where they are saying that using our data, you're generating all the revenue, part with some of that to us. That's not the discussion India is still doing. India is only saying, boss, I am as a regulator want to have the empowerment to ask you, where are you putting this data? And is there something happening to the data I need to know? So they want to just get it right. I think it'll get solved. Because to me, India being such a large market, any player, whether it's Google, anybody, will not have any doubt that they cannot lose so much of revenue, because this is what creates, and it's a universal issue. Many countries have brought this up. India is still playing soft, by the way. Some countries have banned these guys, not China. I'm talking about non-China countries. So that's my answer. That this is law of the land. So you got to be part of that.